All right. So last presentation of the day. First keynote from this conference. We have right now Melissa Logan. She's running a marketing firm who expertises in open source and open source communities. Well, Melissa Logan, tell us all about this. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. It's really good to be here. It's early in my day. I'm outside of Portland, Oregon. I know that this is a global conference, so nice to know where people are and tuning in from all over the place. So just some background on myself. I'm Melissa Logan. I've worked in tech for 20 years. I'm here today to talk about my experiences with ecosystem and marketing on behalf of open source communities. If a community you work with is hoping to have its technology become more widely adopted, this talk should hopefully give you a framework for how to support that effort. And I'm more than happy to answer questions at the end. So first, just some background on myself. I started in the .com era doing tech marketing. I've been at it for about 20 years, as I mentioned. And about a decade ago, I started working in open source at the Linux Foundation, where I was focused on digital strategy and ecosystem, which essentially means understanding the needs of the community and then understanding the needs of the end users and figuring out a way to bridge that gap with information. But my most awesome claims to fame, which you can see on here, is that I was on the first Intro to Linux tutorial on edX, there in the middle, and I rode on a Mardi Gras float with Linus Torvalds at LinuxCon in 2013. Today, I run a marketing firm that specializes in open source and enterprise tech companies at Constantia.io. And today, I just want to talk a little bit about rainbows and a lot about communities. So, sorry about that. Advancing my slides. So presumably everyone here today works with free and open source communities. You already understand the value of having multiple people contributing code, building something that no one person could build by yourself. That same model can be applied to marketing as well. Collaborating with people in your ecosystem that are around your project can greatly expand your reach. And this can be achieved by centralizing a marketing effort for your project. Centralizing it creates a focal point around which people can contribute, similar in open source, where you have code that's in public. That means everyone can contribute. You can do something similar on the marketing front. So I'm going to share some examples of the outsized impact that a collaborative marketing effort can have. So the way we often measure the impact of marketing in an open source project at a macro level, it's not GitHub stars, it's not lines of code, it's something called Shareavoice. It's essentially a gauge on how frequently your product or project is being talked about across the internet in forums and news and other third-party outlets and Reddit and all that good stuff. In this example, I just use a really simple kind of, not a traditional Shareavoice tool, but just using Google Trends. It's a simple way to gauge. Typically, we use other tools to get a lot more granular, but this will just give you an idea of how you can kind of quickly look and see what's being said about a project. To understand the difference in what a centralized marketing effort can have, I compared two similar open source projects in the cloud space. One with a specific coordinated effort, which is OpenStack, and one with a more informal marketing structure, which was CloudStack. So OpenStack, as you all probably know, has a centralized paid marketing team. CloudStack, as an Apache project, has a less formal structure. So they created a framework to participate, but didn't have a directed effort on an ongoing basis. And as you can see in this chart, interest in OpenStack has been significantly higher over the life cycle of the project compared with CloudStack. So certainly there are other market factors at play in all of this, but a centralized marketing effort did have a measurable impact on the growth of OpenStack over CloudStack over its life cycle. And I view marketing really as giving a project its best chance at life. Our aim is really to try to educate people about their choices with the hope that it will increase usage and adoption. Like I said, a lot of things go into that, but it really can help in a significant way. So another metric we look at is contributions. So more awareness in a project driven by marketing often translates to more contributions. I know that not every project wants more contributions. There might not be enough people to review, or maybe your governance is not set up or developed in the right way yet. Maybe you're just not ready for other reasons. But it is often a natural byproduct of marketing. So we like to look at it as another key health indicator. So in these two graphs, we're looking again at CloudStack and OpenStack. CloudStack is on the left, OpenStack is on the right. So I will say a couple things. One, these don't start at exactly the same time. There's a 3-year difference based on when these projects began, but they're roughly around the same time frame. And 2, the scale is different. So OpenStack on the right, it goes up to 300 on the y-axis. On CloudStack on the left goes up to 150. So what you're seeing is that OpenStack at its peak was dramatically higher in terms of contributions over CloudStack. And again, there are other market factors at work here, but this does show a correlation between interest in a project driven by marketing and usage and adoption. So the question is, how do you centralize a marketing effort in a disaggregated ecosystem? So CloudStack would be that at some level. It's easier for an organization like OpenStack because it has a central paid team. How do you kind of compete against that? So participation in open source, as you all probably know, is driven by self-interest. Different people are participating for a lot of different reasons. So in this picture here, there's people who create distributions that participate for their specific reason. You might have a solution built on top of it. You might have apps or services or integrate with it or integrate your product with it. There are consultancies and integrators that create managed services around open source. And then, of course, you have end users and so on and so forth. Your array of people might look a little bit different. But really at the center here, there is a collective interest. And each one of these people has a collective interest in keeping this project healthy, stable, and growing. So in the case of the Linux app ecosystem, there's a desire to standardize certain elements from a technical perspective and increase adoption and interest. So it really would benefit the whole ecosystem to work collectively on that challenge. And that's really where you start when you think about collaborative marketing and an open source project, finding that common ground. What is that collective interest? And that can be done formally or informally. You can do research, you can have one-on-one conversations with people, you can have official community meetings. It's really whatever makes sense for your community. In fact, throughout this presentation, this is a general framework, but your community has its own norms and values, so you might do things a little bit differently. But once you understand what is that collective interest here at the center, you can develop a shared vision or a goal for the future with the members of your ecosystem. So after identifying that collective interest, you need to then recruit people to lead the marketing effort. Marketing in open source is similar to a startup, but there is a key difference. These people don't work at the same company. They're not on your internal team. They don't get a paycheck from you. They're very often volunteers. That's why that identifying that collective interest and defining your shared goal is really, really important. It's equally important to find the right types of people to work on the effort with the right personalities and expertise. On the personality side, you want people to act as a neutral entity on behalf of your entire ecosystem. You don't want someone who's going to come in and try to drive their own personal interests. So they really do need to be this kind of neutral arbiter that acts on behalf of the entire community, not influenced by the loudest voices, etc. On the expertise side, you do want to have someone with marketing expertise. They should absolutely understand your technology and how it fits into the landscape, but they should also have knowledge of the best places to reach your specific audience. They should have relationships with media and analysts if that's something that you need. They need to also understand how marketing is changing during COVID. Things are changing pretty rapidly these days with how people are reaching people. I think you all know we're getting a lot of webinar fatigue and things like this. So you really have to understand, they should understand what's happening in the marketing world to see what's working and what's not. And these people can come from within your community, or they can be outside your community. Again, it really is up to what makes sense, the most sense for people that you communicate with on a regular basis. So once you determine that shared goal and you figure out who that group of people, person or a group of people is who can help direct this effort, then comes the really hard work of asking the broader ecosystem or community to participate in that. It's no easy task. How do you get people to volunteer their time when they have a lot of other things going on? And especially now during the pandemic, there are even more constraints on people's time than ever before. And I found that actually, regardless of whether someone is paid full-time to work on open source or not, or they're a volunteer, marketing is typically the last thing they think of. They don't volunteer, they volunteer to contribute code, not marketing. That's why defining that shared vision, again, is really crucial. If you have that similar interest, then the ask becomes a lot easier. It can also help to design an architecture of participation for people to contribute for the marketing effort. And there are both formal and informal ways you can do this. Some projects have formal governance around marketing and bylaws. It's in these documents. There may be a committee that hosts regular meetings, so on and so forth. On the left-hand side here, you have this example from the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, where marketing is written into the bylaws. Others may meet more informally or create a more general guideline on how to participate. That's what you see on the right-hand side. This is, again, a CloudStack example. This is on their wiki, and it just outlines how you can contribute to the marketing effort. Whether or not people followed up on this front, I can't say. I'm not part of that community, but at least you have some general guidelines here for people to participate. Kubernetes does something similar with guidelines on how to contribute, and they put them right into the GitHub repo so anyone can see. But really, in either scenario, defining that shared goal and outcomes gives people a framework to work backward from and contribute to. It makes it really concrete. Again, you really need to figure out what works best for your community. And I'd encourage you to put it into writing so it's normalized as a best practice. And a side benefit of this is that it encourages those non-technical type of contributions to an open source project, which can be just as valuable as a code contribution. Docs is a really good example of this. Once you've defined that framework to centralize the marketing effort, then your community acts like a prism for your efforts, refracting a single contribution into this beautiful array, just like in open source software development. You contribute code that by itself might be useful, but refracted through the community becomes something much, much greater. That's what open source can do. And that's what we can achieve with collaborative marketing, this really beautiful rainbow effect. And I'm going to give you some examples of this in practice. But first, I want to talk a little bit about the term marketing. So most people, when you say marketing, immediately think of ads or landing pages or those thousands of automated emails you get with people trying to sell you something, the most intrusive forms of marketing, which are memorable because they're very annoying. That's not typically what we do. At its core, marketing is about communicating with your end users. You need to understand your end users in order to communicate with them about the value of your product or service. And how you do that will be dictated by your industry, your market, and the end user preferences. So in open source, people don't buy your product, they adopt it, but the core marketing principle is the same. You're trying to give people something of value so they understand and appreciate and hopefully adopt your product or project. And marketing can include everything from public relations, so working with journalists, analyst relations, working with analyst firms, and so on, research that you can conduct to understand your end users, your market, your industry, so on and so forth. Content, which can include things like executive level pieces to tutorials or docs. You could create an ecosystem marketplace. You could do advertising. Yes, you can do automated emails, although I'd recommend using them very sparingly and trying to make sure that you have something of value in there for people. Speaking at events, or there's a multitude of other activities. There's just a huge laundry list of things you can do, and dependent on who your end users are and how you think they would like to receive that information from you. It's really anything designed to grow adoption and interest in a project. That's what falls under the marketing umbrella. So I'm going to share some examples with you. So probably about 5 or 6 years ago now, I worked with a project called Cloud Foundry. It is an open source platform as a service. And at that time, we had a charter to grow awareness for the Cloud Foundry ecosystem to help fuel adoption for the project and for the different distributions that were available on Cloud Foundry. There were several commercial distributions at that time and thousands of services and integrations. But what we kept hearing is that end users weren't always aware of the breadth of the ecosystem. They didn't understand what their choices were. And you wouldn't know it if you visited the main website back then. There was information about distributions, but really you couldn't see it all in one place. So to showcase the breadth of that ecosystem, we decided to create a centralized marketplace to aggregate all those pieces. And then in those, redirecting them to specific solutions, essentially serving as a pass-through for the members of our ecosystem. Each distribution had its own site that showcased its own ecosystem, but our goal was to try to bring them together in one place to demonstrate the strength of the entire community, really acting like a top of funnel source for all distributions. But we had a relatively small team. It was just me and a couple of devs, so we had to get kind of creative. There were over 5,000 individual services, distributions, solutions, et cetera. So there was no way that we could manually do this and bring it together. So we got permission from all the members of the ecosystem, the core distributions, and created scripts for it, and then built this frame that you see here around it. And the result was this centralized location. So end users could browse the entire ecosystem in one place and connect directly with partners on solutions that they needed. In tandem with this, we also built a campaign to promote this. And the new page was promoted by all key players in our ecosystem. And how we measured success of this was we did see web traffic increase by, I think, 20%. But really more importantly, the participants, the distributions, the integrators, all the people in this marketplace saw their traffic increase with us being the referral site. And that was a huge win because that was the ultimate goal. It's not about us retaining that the traffic, it's about passing that traffic on to the distributions and the people in the ecosystem. So it really was a win-win for everybody. It helped kind of grow that pie for everybody. And this is why I think about open source marketing like a Prism, their individual contributions being refracted through this community lens on this community site produce this unified but really diverse marketing effort on the other side. And I'll talk a little bit more on the next slide about how we actually got everyone to promote it, because that is no easy task either. So this is another example from Cloud Foundry again. Building a marketplace is relatively straightforward. It's not that it wasn't hard, it was just relatively straightforward. But getting people to actually participate in promoting this in a collective way, that was actually harder. Every participant has their own marketing goals. They have their own, needs and demands and things that they're thinking about. They're trying to sell their own products, right? And why would they help promote this marketplace that points people somewhere else? At that time, Cloud Foundry, I think, had about 50 members. Remember, we were a pretty small team. We had 2 major events to put on every year, along with our day-to-day marketing work. And we really didn't have time to connect with every single member of that ecosystem. 50 new people anytime we had some new marketing initiative. So we thought we would experiment with putting together a web portal, essentially kind of a member portal that incentivized people to participate in marketing by offering additional benefits to those who did. So for example, promoting the new marketplace was one of the campaigns that we created and pushed out through this dashboard. So it was kind of an experiment. We thought we'd try something new and see how it worked. We created a series of actions that we wanted the community to take and benefits that they would receive for doing so. An example of this was promoting the marketplace using a specific link that we gave them that had specific UTM parameters over a certain period of time. And the ask was, please promote this, to your network over social media or email or wherever else it might make sense. And then clicks were shown on a leaderboard. And when certain thresholds were met, they would receive a benefit such as a special social media tweet or t-shirts or a logo on a newsletter. Really kind of simple things, but useful to participants and also kind of fed back into our shared goal of promoting the ecosystem from our neutral point of view. And actually determining the actions and benefits was more difficult than the technology. We wanted to make sure we offered something of value. It wasn't, it wasn't junk. What could we track? What would be meaningful? All of these types of things. So we iterated on that. We got a lot of feedback from the ecosystem as we were building it out too, and then really just kind of tested it as we went. The other benefit of this portal was that we had a lot of other collateral on it. So we used it as kind of our doc store and put collateral FAQs. You could see some links on the left-hand side. So there was this became a hub for our ecosystem to participate in our marketing, our collaborative marketing efforts. So before we implemented this, we weren't really sure who was actually doing things when we would send out materials. So it's hard to gauge before and after from the beginning. But after we started using this over several campaigns, we saw a 22% increase in participation from campaign 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4. So it really did spark some additional participation from our community. So moving to a different example, the first two with Cloud Foundry were a little more complex. They might require a little more time and funding to do. I wanted to do something, share something that was a little more lightweight, but could help you raise awareness and interest for a project or your ecosystem. So this is for the Apache Cassandra community. We were hired to work with them to be a neutral marketing contributor by DataStax. It's a company that provides a commercial distribution on top of Cassandra. They really understand the value that community marketing can have, not just for their business, but for the broader ecosystem. And we wanted to start digging into mailing lists, getting to know contributors and committers, really understanding the technology and the ecosystem and the landscape to uncover what are those untold stories in the community that we should be bringing forward. Cassandra is a really powerful open source database. It's used by some of the world's largest companies like Apple, Netflix, Target, et cetera. But if you looked at your website in the first half of this year, you'd think there wasn't much happening in the community, and that simply was not true. The community had been working on its next release, 4.0, and we found a lot of great stories to tell about the beta release, about individual features that were in the release, about new testing tools. There were new projects being proposed. We also looked at the user Slack and user mailing list to see what common struggles that new users had that we could share solutions for or wanted to understand better. There was really a lot to share, but without a dedicated marketing contributor, what you heard about Cassandra came in fits and starts. So if you look back on their blog, I think there was just one blog in 2018, maybe 4 in 2018. So it was really kind of inconsistent. What you would know about the community if you went to their website as the key source, which most people would do. So in working with the community, we wrote and or asked people to write blogs about 4.0 and other topics for the main website. And that's what you see here, the left-hand side. And then we also helped some of that content be placed on other sites like opensource.com or dzone or HackerNoon or Container Journal and so forth. So people were not only hearing about Cassandra who were looking directly at the Cassandra website, maybe people who already knew about it, but also reaching people where hopefully new people who were interested in Cassandra as a database. And since we started that effort, I think there have been 1 to 2 posts every month on the site, as well as about as many in other media outlets too. So the ripple effect now is that the site is getting more traffic And the community also is being recognized for its efforts. All the stuff they were already doing, we just kind of brought forward. So as a marketer, where do you find ideas to communicate? I just talked about some of them. In open source, there's no central place where you can go figure that out. There's no product roadmap, not always, sometimes, but there isn't typically a product roadmap like you have in a proprietary company. But I'd argue that in open source, you actually have a broader range of sources to draw from. Your ecosystem and your community are superpowers, and you don't need permission to go talk to them and figure things out. Where in a company, you might have to go get permission. Can I talk to this vendor? Can I talk to this person, et cetera? In open source, there are so many people you can talk to understand and find sources for marketing. And this slide is just putting together a few things that might spark ideas for you. So of course, on the top, technology. What's happening with the release cycle? What is coming up in the roadmap? What projects exist today? And are there new ones being introduced? What conversations might be bubbling up in your community? On the community side, who is contributing? Who is participating? How diverse is it? How inclusive is it? Are there hobbyists doing cool things? Do you have ambassadors doing cool things? Do you have community awards, or should you create community awards for folks? Who are the de facto spokespeople? Just really digging into the personalities and people in your community. I know that a lot of there are some projects that have pretty charismatic leaders, and that can get a lot of visibility for community. In the absence of that, marketing can help find those people and find those stories. If you don't have this charismatic leader, then how can you do that? I think a good marketer will go figure that out and find out who those voices are and bring them forward. And then, of course, your end users. In open source, can you figure out who's using it? Will they do a case study? Will they talk about their use cases? So on and so forth. How are they using the project? Specific use cases, again, you can create a whole list of these. How are people using it? Skills. Is your project hard to adopt and use? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. How long does it take? Who's writing docs? Are there docs even? Can you do training and certification? So what are the skills needed for your project? And can you help people onboard faster? And then, of course, in your ecosystem, what integrations are being used? What are people building on top of? What does it work with? And what do competitive ecosystems look like, both proprietary and open source? Because that's who you want to be comparing with at some level and showing how the value of your ecosystem and your project. Can people easily contribute, so on and so forth. And really, that's the kind of summary of the talk. And I hope by now you have a better understanding of how marketing can help an open source project. This slide just shows you what I call an open source marketing flywheel. It just shows you when you understand the technology, you dig into that, you apply some marketing to it, it increases awareness and interest. Then you have people adopting it and creating new integrations on it, which then they contribute back into the technology, and it just goes into this nice little circle. I hope this gave you a bit of a framework of how you might look at your own community, figure out who those stakeholders are, figure out what your collective interest is, and how to get those multiple stakeholders involved in a collaborative marketing effort. I am more than happy to answer any questions that you have. Quickly, before we do that, I wanted to mention that we are printing just a few of these Linux Prism t-shirts. So if you want one, just let me know. Send me a tweet to Melissa_B2B. And my only ask is that you wear it. So with that, I'll open it up to questions and hopefully be able to answer them. Let's see, I'm looking back through the Q&A. I'm glad the audio is working. Perfect. Oh, Luna, I will hook you up. Just send me an email, melissa@constantia.io. While Philip is typing, I'll just ask, do any of you participate in marketing in your communities? Do you have specific challenges you've been facing? I'm happy to talk through those. Any specific cases too. Excellent. And while people are typing, if you do think of things after the fact, I am more than happy to get on a phone call with you or chat through email or something like that. And just, I'm happy to talk through any challenges you might be facing and help you work through those. I'd like to give a plug to the Sustain OSS podcast too, which they do have a marketing working group that talks about this type of stuff. I think it's bi-weekly every Thursday. I join when I can. I can't always join, but it's a great group to just bounce ideas off of too, in terms of marketing for your communities. Yes, Moini, I totally get it. It is tough to get people to write. I think one thing you might consider, if you have topics, but have people have a blank page, it can be more difficult. If there's someone who could even write outlines for people, that can often expedite things for you. If you just give them something to think about, some kind of framework, that might be a way to help people get started on writing. I know I certainly do. I did with this keynote. It freaks me out to have a blank page. So if you give them something to work off of, it'll help. Let's see. And Mihaela, comment on the difficulties marketing and non-programmers face when trying to contribute in open source projects. There are usually many obstacles from devs. They seem to feel marketing is corporate evil or unnecessary. Yeah, I think this is true. So let me just talk first about, there are technical difficulties often when contributing to open source projects. So for example, for the Cassandra community, if you wanted to contribute a blog, you have to download the Cassandra website dev environment, figure out how to do all that stuff, and then push a blog up as a PR and then get it accepted. And that creates a technical barrier, I think, for non-technical contributors. So the less in a community, if you can lessen those technical barriers, that will help more people contribute. In terms of general perception of marketing in open source, I think it's true. This is why I frame the talk around, it's not about those automated emails and channels and social media and this, that, and the other. It could be that, and that's fine, but what you're trying to do is provide something of value. So I would say, look at what when you talk to the people in the open source community, say you're trying to reflect what they're doing and show them how you could do that. So in Cassandra, it's not a fluffy automation email, but it's what are they doing with the technology and how is that useful to end users? We found out, for example, that Bloomberg was using Cassandra. We put it in the newsletter and sent it out, and Bloomberg was thrilled about that. They were excited to see that we noticed that, and that was just kind of a small mention we found on a website. So I think it's just, how do you find the ways that you can show that marketing is valuable? It's not about social media or web traffic or whatever. It's about what is happening in your community that you can showcase and demonstrate to potential end users. Does that help? I'm happy to go into that more as well if you like. And that's a good question. It's very difficult. There is a perception that marketing is not of marketing just being things like advertising, and that's not it. It's much more diverse than that. So the question from Alex was, do you have ideas as to how to convince non-programmers to work on marketing besides hiring them? So it's true. I think marketing, so as I mentioned, even people who are paid to work on open source, they don't think about marketing. They think about contributing code as their main contribution. I will say, though, if they're contributing code and it's really cool, they'll probably want to write about it. So that's one way to get them involved, is to say, we really want to showcase this cool new like fuzz testing tool that you created, or this new update that you made to, you know, such and such project. And we found that's really effective and it's a win-win, right? It showcases the project and the momentum, as well as this individual person. And so we will help them put that on paper and then try to get that into an outlet like a D-Zone or HackerNoon or something like that. So it really is kind of a win-win-win. What's in it for them? Well, they get recognition for the things that they're contributing. So how would you approach contributing to a project that doesn't have much non-programming people involved? What are things that can be done without wasting a lot of time that can show results? So I would say content is probably one of the well, it's not easy, but it's something that is typically of high value that can get a lot of visibility for a project that may not take a ton of time. So in that last example, again, I think if someone contributed something really cool to a project, have them write that up, and you can, again, create that outline for them, write that up, help them edit it, and then you take it and try to place it on a site. There are a lot of really great self-publishing sites out there too. Dev.to, I've mentioned D-Zone, I've mentioned HackerNoon. These are really great places for people to showcase their work. And that might be a good place to start. No problem. If no more questions, then you all know where to find me. I've got my email and my Twitter handle up here. Please feel free to reach out anytime. And thank you so much for the invite, Linux App Summit. And I hope that it was useful.
Thank you very much, Melissa. It was a great talk. Also, this t-shirt looks amazing, and I am going to tweet or whatever is needed.
I love it. Awesome.
Thank you. Well, then, this was the last talk of the day. Remember that, well, we're starting tomorrow. Today was just the first day. We're starting tomorrow at 8 a.m. UTC, when we will learn about graphics on Linux. And until then, well, hang out around our channels. We have the Telegram attendees group. If you're not there, join it. Ask here if you don't know how to, or somebody pastes the URL. We have the hallway track, which I think that it will be open for a bit. And otherwise, talk to you tomorrow and have tons of fun. If you stay around hacking and doing, well, Linux apps, that's also very welcome. See you tomorrow. Bye.